Welcome to the Friday Men's Breakfast Podcast, brought to you by the Chapel Podcast Network. In this week's lesson from the book of 1 Samuel, Dave Rochford takes us through the account of David sparing Saul's life a second time. So open your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 26 and join us as we continue to see what happens when the king that you think you want is not God.
So you continue your journey through 1 Samuel. You've been diligent. You see, I took this time off, came back, and here you are on the cusp of moving to 2 Samuel. Does anybody know what's quite unusual about 2 Samuel? I suppose a number of things could be. 2 Samuel is that rare book of the Bible where actually Samuel, the namesake of the book, does not make an appearance at all in 2 Samuel because he is now deceased, right? We've come just across that part of the text. Does anybody know how strange that, or why that would be so strange? What set of circumstances led to a book called 2 Samuel without the prophet Samuel? There's originally one book. It's actually about that simple. There was no 1st, 2nd Samuel. It's when the Hebrew text was translated to the Septuagint, the ancient Greek text, they thought to divide that. I'm not sure why. Maybe they wanted to make way for the apologetic series in summer. Maybe. So I come as your unapologetic Methodist today. Thank you for having me here. So as has been shared, we'll take a look at chapter 26. There are some very close parallels between 26 and a chapter that you all did quite recently. We'll allude to that. There's some fun names and place names, so we'll get started and plunge right in. And these are the kind of place names, it's like children on Christmas Eve. You know, it's Quirinius, say it however you want, but with confidence and move on. So here we go, right off the bat. So chapter 26, we'll just roll through a few verses. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, David is in hiding on the hill at Hakilah, which is opposite Jeshimon. Jeshimon could be a place name. It might just mean the desolate space, the empty wilderness space, which is what it means in Hebrew. This, of course, is a reintroduction to David and Saul. You've been on a journey with them for some time. You know, at one time, David was accorded family status in Saul's household, in the king's household. Saul presented as the first king of Israel, and in the voice of the narrator, of the chronicler, kind of a mixed record of Hebrew kingship right off the bat, right? Because Saul is, as some might say, straight out of central casting. A head taller than everybody else, that must be quite a cross to bear. He looks like he was born for the mantle of leadership, and yet from the very outset, there's just something about him. Do you remember the part where he is hiding among the baggage when it's time for him to be tapped in, right? Hiding among the baggage. So we could speculate, we could psychologize, no need to do that. But we do know that although he's been an extremely successful leader in battle, he is a military prodigy. In battle, he's personally fearless. I'm going to be playing a little bit of duck and cover with you. I can't hide it. That's how it would be different. Okay, all right, is that in the context of his many, many years now as the first monarch of the Kingdom of Israel, there's been another side to emerge to him, hasn't it? And however you would describe that, paranoia, insecurity, deep and abiding suspicion. In fairness, kings, tyrants, and despots tend to end up this way. Saddam Hussein once enticed his 2 sons-in-law to come back from exile and had them shot straight out of the airport. There's a dictator, longest-serving dictator in the Western Hemisphere, a man named Alfredo Stroessner. Anybody know what country Alfredo was? Paraguay. Yes, CS, yeah. So Alfredo Stroessner ruled for, I think, not quite 50 years in Paraguay. Do you know who deposed him?
Well, the United States, kind of.
Kind of. Oh, boy. Now we're going geopolitical. Well, we'll say that the ascendant leader was his son-in-law. So it, yes, right. Dale, you sound like you just got back. That's right. Thank you. I'm impressed. So the lesson here is sometimes these are family affairs. You're always looking for threats. David seemingly doesn't emerge as a threat except for the fact that from the very outset, Samuel has not been a leader who always heeds the voice of God's prophet, Samuel. And ultimately, this leads God to saying, I'm going to remove the mantle of leadership in my own time. I'm going to give it to David, who is not a head taller than others, is a kind of a ruddy-faced boy, but with maturation and with care, yes, David's strengths and his weaknesses, which are many, are going to be useful. He's going to be the next one. Saul, of course, understands this. He just doesn't accept it. And he's going to take steps that he will remain the sovereign no matter what, no matter who says otherwise, even the prophet of the Most High God and God above. Okay. You'll recall that Saul tries to pin David to the wall with his javelin, with his spear, and conspicuously there is this episode where Saul astonishingly, perhaps miraculously, seems to fall into David's hands. You remember the episode in the cave? Y'all study that together too. Well, we're going to allude to that more than once today. All right. So David, it turns out it's about you again. My condolences, but we shall see. All right. So picking up there again at verse 3. Saul encamped on the hill of Hakilah, which is opposite Jeshimon, beside the road. But David remained in the wilderness. When he learned that Saul had come after him into the wilderness, so he's actively pursuing David, to state the obvious, David sent out spies. So whereas Saul has received reports from the field, some intelligence data from the Ziphites, who seem to do this recreationally, because they're the ones back in chapter 23 that informed previously where David was. These guys get around. But David has his own information. Learned that Saul had indeed arrived. Verse 5, then David set out and came to the place where Saul had encamped. David saw the place where Saul lay, with Abner, son of Ner. In fact, Abner and Saul are related. This is a family affair. Does anybody know the relationship? It's obscure. Abner is King Saul's uncle. King Saul is not a young guy. Now, some uncles and nephews are relatively close in age based on the fall in the family, but we can reason that Abner is also clearly a person of mature age, a career military man in the field. He's commander of the army. Saul was lying within the encampment. This is NRSV translation, a literal or close translation, and I think that NAS, New American Standard, which tends to follow ancient languages closely, might say within the circle, within the track. King James might be in the ditch. Anybody have King James? Does it say in the ditch or does it say in the camp? In the trench. That's a good one. So that's very close. This is believed because the technique for breaking a temporary camp in military formation was you non-metaphorically circle the wagons and the chariots. You circle them around, you form a circle. You're within the trench, within the circle. This was done to break up a cavalry charge if one should come in the dead of night. And then senior leadership would be within the circle among all the soldiers, and so it is with appropriately with King Saul. So let's see. Saul is lying within the encampment. The army is encamped around him. Verse 6, then David said to Ahimelech, the Hittite, and to Joab's brother, Abishai, son of Zeruiah. Weird-sounding names, but Zeruiah, we've seen this name before. That's actually not a man. That's David's sister. Excuse me. Yeah, that's David's sister. So one of the two people he's speaking to is his nephew. He's one of a trio of nephews. These are action-oriented young men. One of them, Joab, will later have a fondness for hewing people to death on the altar of the Lord. They are all three ruthless. In an extraordinary moment, a few chapters from now, in 2 Samuel, David will say, these three nephews of mine are too violent. And that's from David. That'd be like Mahatma Gandhi saying, they're a little too nonviolent for my taste, right? Because David is no stranger to violence, and his own record of kingship, to state the obvious, will give evidence to the fact that it can have a corrosive effect, this wielding of power on the human spirit and on our virtues. We'd like to think our virtues are resilient, but in fact, when tested, some of us fall prey to even the best impulses when they can be exaggerated by the evil one. All right. So David says to Ahimelech the Hittite, as well as to his nephew Abishai, "Will you go down with me to the camp of Saul?" Well, that sounds nuts. And Abishai says, "Oh, I'll go down with you." So David and Abishai went to the army by night. There Saul lay sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. We pause for a moment to say, this is not the way you treat your weapons, right? That's a peculiar inclusion. I don't know why that would be. Maybe there was some military reason, but no doubt the chronicler would want people to remember this spear or one just like it was once stuck somewhere else, right? This is the one that was hurled at David in an attempt to pin him to the wall. Now it's there, plunged in the earth right beside the slumbering king. And Abner, that is to say Saul's commander-in-chief, and the army lay around him. And Abishai said to David, "God has given your enemy into your hand today. Now therefore let me go and pin him to the ground with one stroke of the spear." I love this next verse. "I will not strike him twice." You have somebody like that in your life? I won't strike twice. I'll do the job. So this young man, this nephew, it's an assassination mission. That's how he understands it. And it's incredible. The sentries appear to be asleep. The careless of these people, carelessness, it's their job to protect the king. And so he sees an opportunity, but he sees something else. What? He sees the handiwork of God in it. Is that true? Has God brought the king to David again, such that David can accelerate the transition in kingship? He knows he is to be the king. He knows this is God's will. Samuel has made it clear. It's been manifestly clear in other ways. So, well, one thing that's a bit different this time is, note, when Saul went into that cave to relieve himself, remember that? And David was in the inner recesses of the cave hiding out. He was able to creep out. Well, clearly, that's a time when, by shocking circumstance, Saul came to him. This is not that, right? He's proactively gone to Saul this time. Why? Quite different, despite the considerable similarities which are about to amplify. All right. David immediately has a response to his nephew, the military man. He says to Abishai, "Do not destroy him," a stronger word than kill, which is to say, do no harm to his body at all. For who can raise his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Then David said, No. All right. Of all people, I can live with it going low.
Tighten it up.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
I can't promise it won't sink more.
I get it. So David elaborates. Now, this is quite a conversation to have in a sleeping encampment of 3,000 of Saul's best, right? Presumably, it's whispered and hissed. As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him down. That is King Saul. Or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. All three possibilities. God will simply reach out and strike the king when the time is right, or his day will come. Maybe he dies in his bed of old age, or he dies in battle. Which of these is the ultimate outcome for poor King Saul, such a tragic figure? Yes and no. I mean, he does die on the battlefield. By whose hand? By his own, as a suicide, having been routed. Yeah, extraordinary. So a little bit of ironic or perhaps prophetic speech here, but certainly David's resolve shows. Verse 11, "The Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now, take that spear that is at his head, and the water jar," go figure, "and let us go." Verse 12, something interesting happens here, and I've never seen it mentioned in a study guide. Somebody must have done so. So David took the spear. Now, wait a minute. I thought he just gave an explicit instruction to his nephew that he was to take the spear. Instead, suddenly, it's David. Only two possibilities, seemingly. One is that they took it. David took it because somebody, got it to it, gave it to him. I kind of wonder, David's like, better idea, let me get the spear. I don't want you to get any ideas at the last moment. I don't want you to follow an impulse. Well, it was right there. King was right next to it. It was an accident. I tripped. Who knows what he would say? He's a prodigy of violence. So let's see here. Verse 12, so David took the spear that it was at Saul's head and the water jar, and they went away. No one saw it or knew it, nor did anyone awake, which seems preposterous. Now a little bit of interpretation. For they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. So here, a little bit different from the cave story, which is a story of David's initiative altogether. Here it seems to be both. It's absolutely being brought together by David's initiative, but also God's handiwork seems to be in it. Does that strengthen the case of young Abishai? Is David missing an opportunity, again, to accelerate a planned transition? Story's not over yet. Verse 13, then David went over to the other side, stood on top of a hill far away. I take that to mean out of archer range, but who knows? With a great distance between them. It's doubled up, emphasis on the distance. Then David shouts out to the army. I presume this is in the pre-dawn hours, not the way you want to wake up. Boy, these poor sentries have fallen asleep. David calls. He knows the cast of characters. He's been accorded a family status in times past. He calls out to Uncle Abner, son of Ner, and he says, Abner, will you not answer? Which is to say, wake up, Abner. And Abner replies, who are you that calls to the king? And David said to Abner, are you not a man who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over the Lord the king? Over your Lord the king. At this point, not yet my Lord the king. For one of the people came in to destroy your Lord the king. This thing that you have done, it's not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die. In fact, Abner will die, and violently. Because you have not kept watch over your Lord, the Lord's anointed. A lot of repetition of titles by David. It's only going to continue throughout the text. It's actually important. See now, where is the king's spear or the water jar that was once at his head? Saul, not Abner, Saul recognized David's voice and said, is this your voice, my son David? Guy's got nerve, right? I mean, he's been out to pursue, to find, and to terminate with extreme prejudice, this young man, but he's calling on that family relationship. Let's watch, because previously in the episode in chapters 23, 24, the exchange at the cave, David uses the language of my father. In fact, it's going to be missing. David says, it is my voice, my Lord, O King, double title. Then he added, why does my Lord pursue his servant? For what have I done? What guilt is on my hands? Now let my Lord the King hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, isn't that interesting? May he accept an offering. That is, may his will be changed if it was God who stirred you up against me. Now, I don't know if David believes that, but he's certainly honoring Saul this way. But if it is mortals, may they be cursed before the Lord. Somebody puts you up to this, well, shame on them, curse upon them. For they have driven me out today from my share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. This may be the strangest verse in the whole passage. Somebody is saying to David, go serve other gods? We're not entirely clear what this means, but we do know in a little told chapter of David's biography, he is actually, following this, perhaps in desperation, take his followers and he's going to ally up with an enemy. Do you happen to know who it is? It's the Philistines. Yeah, the historic seagoing enemies of the Hebrew people, which is mind-boggling. It would be roughly equivalent to George Washington saying, well, I don't talk a lot about 1771. That's actually when I teamed up with the Brits. But anyway, it's preposterous. It also shows us the amazingly unvarnished quality of the Hebrew texts, right? Of the chronicler here. There is no attempt to whitewash. It's not a cherry tree story that we get about Saul or David. It's a very ambiguous, well-rounded, it's a very human portrait. And we think, oh, these guys are either violent or corrupt. Yeah, just on a bigger scale. Otherwise, they're like the people who live across the street from you and the people who live across the street from them. All right, editorial. Yep. So, let's see here, to keep my finger on it. So David affirms, it is my voice, what guilt is on my hands. Now therefore, this is verse 19, now therefore let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord is stirred up against me, may accept an offering. He seems to be honoring his former father-in-law's dignity. Former father-in-law, because David's beloved wife Michal has been taken by her father Saul and married to someone else. David's been written out of the inheritance. As far as the line made to serve other gods, it skirts the edge of, look what you made me do. He's going to end up with the Philistines, but not for long, and not against the Hebrew kingdom. Verse 20, now therefore do not let my blood fall to the ground away from the presence of the Lord in some foreign land. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like the one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. I think he means by that. All this attention for the likes of me. I mean, in some ways, he's having it both ways. I'm but a flea, Lord, Holy King, King of anointed by God. But it's also true that this particular flea, he's way beyond the flea circus. He's on his way to the palace. It is understood. It's named. It's prophesied. It's going to be the next king. Then Saul replies to him, verse 21. Boy, this is a succinct statement of repentance, isn't it? I have done wrong. Come back. Again, the affirmation of family. My son David, for I will never harm you again, because my life was precious in your sight today. I have been a fool. Alas, this is a really good epitaph for poor King Saul. This war prodigy, this person who's so inspired by his look, his stature, his physicality, his ability, he has played the fool, and the foolishness of his story isn't over yet. Also, when he speaks, have you ever noticed Saul tends to sound extremely sincere as well as emotional? I mean, I kind of believe it. He had a speech a little bit like this back at the cave, right? Didn't last. And note the distance that David is from the camp. Note the distance David maintains even in giving the spear back. I'm not sure that David doesn't recognize, sometimes there are people in your life who tell you, I am so sorry. I messed up. Never again. Never again. And you think, yeah, right. Yep. Okay. I've been a fool. I've made a great mistake. And David replies, here is the spear, O king. Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards everyone for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, but I would not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. As your life was precious today in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he rescue me from all tribulation. And then Saul said to David, blessed be you, my son David. Triple affirmation of that sonship. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, Saul returned to his place. That line is significant simply because this is a parting of the ways. This will be the last time they address each other. David does not go to his former father-in-law's warm embrace, take that offer of sonship. He does not take it on face value. He does maintain a distance. Saul has in some ways, a final stop before his tragic end that we've already spoken about, wanting desperately to know his future, afraid to consult any of the lesser prophets of God because Samuel is now gone. He will go somewhere for consultancy. Who does he talk to divine his future? The Witch of Endor. Yeah, what a great sound. I think it's straight out of Star Wars. The Witch of Endor. So he will go to something that is a death penalty offense under Hebrew law. He'll go to a diviner, go to a pagan prophet. And that really is his last stop in his long, degenerative journey that leads tragically to his death on the battlefield. And then David ascends to the throne, fulfilling what David foresaw. So let's consider for a moment, and when in a moment when we pivot to our table groups, we might wonder, David shows astonishing resolve when he has all the opportunity, as well as, at least in his nephew's eyes, the moral justification to end the life of the king. And he refuses to do it. For those of us who are Christians, we recognize this resolve that to achieve a desired and even a good end in the wrong way is wrong. Now that's a blanket statement, easy to say, sometimes harder to live out. As I prayed about this verse, I thought about David's resolve. I was reminded that this is actually the third story of David showing a resolve not to use violence to achieve a desired end. We haven't the time to look much at it, but the previous chapter has this doesn't involve King Saul, very much involves David, circumstance where one of David's wives intervenes on behalf of her former husband to stay David's hand against that fellow's murder. David is no pacifist, but here's a circumstance where one of those welcome moments when a woman stands up in a position of leadership, her voice preserved, and pleads for the better angels of his character and a reminder of who he is and who he belongs to, which is the Lord God Most High. 3 stories consecutively that show David's resolve as a man of action, as a man who certainly has killed, as a man who will kill. Remember, David's record includes that on his deathbed, he puts out a hit on someone who once offended him by words alone, right? And he promised that man, as long as I live, you'll be safe. Get it? So David is ruthless. But these successive stories of resolve not to seek power by means of violence could not be accidental. Here's what I was put in mind of. These words will sound familiar to you. So these are Paul's words to the Christians at Rome, living in the very belly of the beast. It's chapter 12. It's his sort of successive treatment in this, latest of his letters. The virtues, the habits, the patterns that shape Christian life. I have to skip some really good ones. Start at verse 16 of Romans 12. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Don't claim to be wiser than you are. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all, which is to say not just all in community, but those outside the fellowship as well. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Christians have sometimes struggled with this verse because it sounds like the wrathful Old Testament God that we struggle to reconcile with the God of mercy and love who sends to us the Son, Jesus Christ. The thing to keep in mind is, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, is less about God's eagerness to pursue vengeance than it is a verse that's there as a mainstay, as a lane, as a clear delineation, not for you. You are not judge, jury, executioner. That is for God. And we're reminded that David says, Saul's day is coming. I don't know when, I don't know how. I can guess it's going to be one of these 3, but it's not our place to strike down the anointed of the Lord. Almost done. Verse 20, no, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. And this is the key verse, verse 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Wow. Overcome evil with good. And therein lies the challenge. How do you do that with foreign policy? Yeah? How do you do that with enemies abroad or seemingly at home? How do you do that in a charged, vitriolic political environment where elements of both sides have a narrative? The other side hates you, resents you, and is bent on your destruction, and that of the whole nation. Is that so? Is that so? Could both sides be right? Surely not. I hope not. Could both sides be wrong? Is there a lot more that actually we share in common than what the narrative that's constantly in our ears would suggest? Is that possible? Well, as Christians, what we have in common is plainly Jesus. And Jesus is pretty unambiguous because Paul's words here absolutely dovetail into quite a lot that Jesus had to say. And that is that we forswear coercive power in the same way that Jesus says, yes, take a sword, take a couple of swords, because I want it very clear when the time comes. It isn't that they done caught us unarmed, boys, run. No. Peter, put your sword away. Jesus will later say to Pontius Pilate, will he not? I am a king. But if I were a king, as you understand kings, would not my followers be fighting in my defense? Do you see that they are not? God's got this. God has appointed a day and a time. There is a rhythm of redemption. There is a deep power in this that the kings of the world don't understand with their spears, bombs. Yeah? So I think for us, factoring really these three chapters, factoring the end of the kingship of the first king, the George Washington of the Hebrew monarchy. And what a sad kingship in so many ways it's been. What lost opportunity. On the other hand, God gave them judges. They wanted the kings, and boy, did they ever get them, you know. What is the lasting lesson for us in the intimate, comparatively modest confines of our lives, in our own territories, in our own encampments? How do we live in such a way that we are willing to forswear doing the right thing for the right reasons, but in an ungodly way? Shortcutting, and also, and this is personally convicting to me, maybe to you, the fantasies of vengeance. Yeah, I mean, I don't go around wreaking a lot of vengeance. Yeah, I drive a Volvo 240. You're just not going to get to punish anybody in that. It's like 40 horsepower and 6,000 pounds. You know, slight exaggeration, but constantly before us, in our movies, in our television shows, in the language of our political leadership, vengeance, grudge, score settling. And Paul would say, do not attempt to overcome evil with evil. Overcome evil with good. You live, you speak, you learn to think and act in a very other way. I will struggle with this one as long as there's a me. But along the way, we become more faithful, more holy, and thus we become advanced agents of the team that circles the wagons for God. Some call it the church.
Thanks for joining us today for our study of 1 Samuel. For more information on the Friday Men's Breakfast, please visit wcchapel.org/Men's Breakfast. Until next week, our prayer for you is that the King you desire first and foremost is not a mere earthly ruler, but Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of both heaven and earth. God bless.